What's up, kings and queens? It's Dan from Daft Previews, back for another comprehensive preview of player picks for this upcoming 10-game slate. Now, leans on players with easy matchup yesterday went 10-8, the lowest hit rate we've seen thanks to a lot of these blowouts. Also, we hit 2,000 subscribers on our last video, so I want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you to everyone who has subbed over the last month and even long beyond that. Between you and I set a goal of hitting 1,500 subscribers by April, but over the last 4 weeks, picked up 1,000 subscribers that I wasn't expecting. So thank you for all the subs, all the wonderful comments that you leave. Let's get into the preview of the upcoming games. If you do just want the best bets, feel free to skip ahead. There's chapters down below. Now, not all games in the upcoming slate will be previewed, as there's a lot of markets that aren't available yet. Also, all of the data that you're going to see in this video is from props.cash. That is my go-to tool for finding all of my player props. Now, if you're interested, you can sign up today. You'll get 25% of your first month by using the code DARF25 when you sign up. So let's do it. Jumping into the first game, to Sacramento Kings versus Philadelphia 76ers. There's not all the markets available at the moment, but some players do have a good matchup. The first one to talk through is Tobias Harris. We're looking at his points plus assist props potentially over 25.5. The reason being the Kings allow the 6th most points and the 7th most assists to power forwards. Tricky thing here is sometimes Tobias lines up at the 3, sometimes he lines up at the 4, but at the end of the day, we know that Joel Embiid's not going to be there, which means Tobias Harris is going to pick up a bigger load on offense. I'm hesitant to play this one. I'm hesitant to play this game, to be honest. But some players that I do have my eye on, which aren't currently available, DeAnthony Melton is one. The Kings allow the 2nd most points and the most 3-pointers to shooting guards. So if we see his line at about between 12.5 to 14.5, definitely something that I'd consider taking. Another one's Malik Monk or Kevin Huerter. The 76ers allow the 4th most rebounds and the 3rd most assists to shooting guards. I know that Huerter is a pretty good rebounder for his size and his position. I've seen him steal rebounds from Sabonis many times before. Malik Monk, I've played his assist prop before as well. So if his assist prop is at 4.5, that's definitely something that I'd look at too. Jumping into the Indiana Pacers versus the Atlanta Hawks. The very first one is Bruce Brown over 4.5 rebounds. The Hawks allow the 7th most rebounds to shooting guards. As you can see here, he's covered in 5 of his last 10 games, averaging 4.7. His last game, no Tyrese Halliburton, he pulled down 9 rebounds against the Washington Wizards. I guess that helps with Kyle Kuzma's throwing on bricks the whole time, but Bruce Brown, rebounds, got a great matchup, and he's done it before, so might be one to look at. The next one is for DeJounte Murray. We're looking at his points prop over 23.5. The Pacers allow the 5th most points to shooting guards over their last 15 games. You can see here he's covered in 6 of his last 10 games, averaging 23.9. In 5 head-to-head matchups against the Pacers, he's covered in 2 of those, but both of those games happen to be from this season. So DeJounte Murray, to cover his points line, might be a very good play. The next one is for Saddiq Bey. We're looking at his points prop over 13.5. The Pacers allow the 2nd most points to small forwards. Jalen Johnson is starting at the 4, so Saddiq will be at the 3. He hasn't covered this line against the Pacers this season, but prior to that, he had. Looking at his last 10 games, he's covered this in 5 of those games, averaging 12.8 points per game. Speaking of Jalen Johnson, he's also got a great matchup, and you've heard it many times before. The Indiana Pacers allow, well, it's actually not true, because now they allow the 2nd most points to power forwards. But Jalen Johnson, over 17.5 points, he does have a great matchup. He's definitely got the potential to blow this out of the water. But looking at his last 10 games, he's only covered this 3 times, averaging 15.9 points per game. He's versus the Indiana Pacers 4 times, and he's failed to hit it every single time. A lot of cappers, I'm sure, are going to be sharing Jalen Johnson points or rebounds picks for this game. I'm personally not going to touch it because I've got a feeling that this game isn't going to be as high scoring as everybody thinks it's going to be. No Tyrese Halliburton means the Pacers play a lot slower than they normally would, and they burn a lot of that shot clock. Another power forward that has a great matchup is Jalen Smith for the Indiana Pacers, looking at over 11.5 points. The Hawks allow the 4th most points and the 2nd most 3-pointers made to power forwards. Now he's played the he's played the Atlanta Hawks 5 times. He's only covered it once. But looking at his last 10 games, he's only covered that in 3 occasions, averaging 10.6. So his line is a lot higher than his recent form. His line is a lot higher than his season form. His line's a lot higher than his form against his opponent, which tells me that the sports books are probably predicting something good out of Jalen Smith, an uplift in minutes, shot attempts, or something like that. The last one in this play is for Miles Turner. Looking at his points prop, over 19.5 points. The Hawks, they allow the 4th most points to centers. Miles Turner, he's covered this in 4 of his last 10 games, averaging 19.5 points. In head-to-head matchups, he's covered in 1 out of 3, but he did score 27 against them in his most recent matchup. Whilst we're using props.cash, I thought I'd show you something interesting about it. We know that Tyrese Halliburton is out. With one flick of a button, we can see how Miles Turner plays without Tyrese Halliburton. So I can see here that in his last 18 games without Tyrese Halliburton, he's only covered this 19.5 point line twice. This season, 4 games without Tyrese Halliburton, hasn't covered it at all. So even though he's got a great matchup, might be a little bit hesitant to take Miles Turner in this one. Jumping into the Houston Rockets versus the Detroit Pistons. The first player who's got a great matchup is Jaden Ivey. Looking at his rebound prop of 3.5, the Rockets allow the 8th most rebounds to shooting guards. Over his last 10 games, he's covered this on 7 occasions, averaging 4.7 rebounds per game. In head-to-head matchups against the Rockets, he's covered in 2 out of 3, averaging 5.3 rebounds. So Jaden Ivey, depending on what odds you can get that on, that might be a good play for tomorrow, but obviously it's a Detroit Pistons, so the blowout could be a risk. The next player is Jalen Green, looking at his points line, over 18.5. Firstly, in the head-to-head matchup, you can see he's covered it in 2 straight games against the Detroit Pistons, averaging 27 points per game. Looking at his last 10, he's covered this in 4 of his last 10 games, averaging 16.9 points per game. The Detroit Pistons do allow the 6th most points to shooting guard. So Jalen Green, good matchup, good past performances against that team. His recent form, probably not so great, but at the same time, how much stock are you going to put into recent form? That's up to you to decide. The next one of my favorite players on the day is Jabari Smith Jr. And we're not looking at his points line, even though he may hit it. I'm looking at his 3-point line. So over 1.5 3-pointers made. You can see he's hit this in 5 of his last 10 games, averaging 2.1 3-pointers made per game. He's versus the Detroit Pistons 3 times. He's covered it only once. So in the 2 games last season, he struggled. His only game against him this year, I think he went 3 from 5. So covering that one quite easily. He has expanded his range this year, and they do allow a lot of 3-pointers made. The 6th most 3-pointers to power forwards, Jabari Smith Jr., definitely one of my favorite players for today. I'll get into more detail about that later. That's one of my best bets. The next one is Alperen Sengun. We're looking at his points and his assists. So the Pistons allow the 3rd most points and the most assists to centers. Over his last 10 games, he's covered this in 6 of them, averaging 30.7 points and assists per game. Head-to-head matchups against the Pistons, he's covered this in 1 of 2, averaging 28.5. They did versus the Detroit Pistons about a week ago, and he scored 35 points and assists against them. So Alperen Sengun has a great matchup. But again, blowout is a risk. He does do a lot of his work in the 4th quarter, so it's definitely something you need to consider. Jumping into the Bulls versus the Golden State Warriors, there's only 2 players who have great advantages in their position. The first one's Zach LaVine, looking at his points prop of over 20.5. He's only covered this in 3 of his last 10 games, averaging 18.6 points per game. One thing to note, he has just come back from injury, so he has only played 3 games since then. He did go over in his last one against the Houston Rockets, if that means anything to you. But his head-to-head form against the Warriors is great too. So he's covered this line in his last 2 games against the Warriors, averaging 24 points per game. The Warriors, they allow the 3rd most points and the 2nd most 3-pointers made to shooting guards. The next one is for Jonathan Kuminga. We're looking at his rebound prop, over 5.5 rebounds. So the Bulls allow the third most rebounds to power forwards. If he's defending Patrick Williams, he's not going to be defending anyone. He'll just be waiting for rebounds. This is the highest we've seen Jonathan Kuminga's rebound line, though. As you can see, in his last 10 games, he's only hit this 4 times. He's averaging 5.2 rebounds per game. And in head-to-head matchups, it was in his rookie season. He only pulled down 3 rebounds, but he only played 10 minutes in that game. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. But 5.5, it's the highest we've seen his line. Moving into the LA Clippers versus Memphis Grizzlies. And there's 2 players that have a great matchup in this one. Paul George, over 5.5 rebounds is one. The Grizzlies allow the 7th most rebounds to small forwards. He's covered this in 5 of his last 10 games, averaging 5.3 rebounds per game. 3 head-to-head matchups against Memphis. It's all green, baby. He's covered in all 3, averaging 8.3 rebounds per game. The other is also a rebounding prop, and that's for my man Zubac, looking at over 10.5 rebounds. The Grizzlies allow the 3rd most rebounds to centers. In head-to-head matchups, he's only covered in 2 or 5, but the 2 games he did cover, he absolutely blew them out of the water. In his last 10 games, he's covered this 5 times. He's averaging 10.8 rebounds in that span. So I think a really important thing to factor in is the matchup, and is he going to play some minutes? Because sometimes his minutes can be a little bit up and down, as you can see here. A lot of the times it goes green is when he plays 30-plus minutes. If he gets less than 30 minutes, chances are he's going to go under. So definitely one thing to think about. Jumping to the New Orleans Pelicans versus the Denver Nuggets. 2 players have a great matchup in this game based off what I can see. And the first one is Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. And we're looking at over 2.5 assists. The New Orleans Pelicans allow the 6th most assists to shooting guards. Looking at his last 10 games, he's covered it 5 times, averaging 2.7 assists per game. He has gone under in 3 straight. But looking at his head-to-head matchup with them, it's pretty remarkable what we're seeing here. He's covered in 3 of 6, averaging 3.8 assists per game. But in his last 2 games against them, so both of the games this year, he pulled down 7 and 8 assists, which are freakishly crazy odds. And it's something that I'm going to watch some film on to figure out why. Are they defending him a certain way? Are they defending the Nuggets? Like, is something happening to generate that? Or is that just really coincidental? Because if his line's at 2.5 and you play him at 6, for example, you might be seeing some crazy odds. So it's something that I'm going to look into. Might have a play on it. If I do have a play on it, you'll see it in my Discord. I've got nothing on it just for now. The other player, though, is Michael Porter Jr. We're looking at his 3-point prop. It's over 2.5 3-pointers made. The Pelicans allow the 2nd most 3-pointers made to small forwards. They obviously don't allow that many to Michael Porter Jr. He's only hit this line in 1 of his last 4 games. He went under in both of the games against the Pelicans this year. Looking at his last 10, he's covered in 5 of those games. He's averaging 2.7 3-pointers made. He has gone under in 2 consecutive games. So will he break out? He's got a great matchup, but he hasn't done it well in the past. I'm not too sure, but I'll leave it up to you to think about whether you want to take that play. Jumping into the Raptors versus the Jazz. Now, at the moment, there's only markets for the Utah Jazz players at the moment. The Raptors, not sure if Siakam's going to play, Pirtle's going to play, so no markets out for them. But there are 2 Utah Jazz players who have a good matchup, and the first one is Chris Dunn. Over 5.5 assists. The Raptors allow the most assists to point guards. I said it in the last video, take James Harden on his overs because they allow the most, and he did go over. But Chris Dunn is not, hasn't had too many games starting at point guard, and he only plays 22.5 minutes per game. So he might start, but he might not play that much. But you can see some wild stats here. He could go off for 13 assists. He could get less than 4. So the matchup is good, but is Chris Dunn going to be the one creating? I'm not too sure. The other player who has a good matchup, though, is John Collins. He's starting at center now. They're playing small. But John Collins, look at this. Last 10, he's covered in 5 of those games, averaging 13.2 points per game. But his last 5 have been even better. 4 of his last 5 games he's gone over, averaging 16.4 points per game. In head-to-head matchups, though, against the Raptors, struggled. He's gone under in 4 consecutive games. Didn't matter if he was in Atlanta or Utah, he's gone under. So he does have a good matchup. His recent form is really good, but his form against the Raptors is not. Definitely something that you need to explore. Jumping into the last game, the Charlotte Hornets versus San Antonio Spurs. So only Spurs player markets are up at the moment. The Charlotte Hornets probably have some ins and outs happening with their lineup, and there's only one player who has an advantage against the Hornets, and that's Victor Wembanyama. So he actually has an advantage in all stat categories. The Hornets allow the most points, the second most rebounds, and the seventh most assists to centers. So I thought I'd tackle this and go through each one of his props just to give you an idea. So looking at his points, he's covered his points line in only 3 of 10 games. So the line is very high. As you can see in this dotted line, this is when his minutes restriction started, and the line has only been going up. He does have a great matchup, so fair enough to see that line going up. Having a look at his minutes, they've been trying to keep him at about 24 minutes since that game against the Chicago Bulls. Right here, where we saw his line start to dip. But apparently Victor's feeling great. He wants to get off the minutes restriction. He wants to win Rookie of the Year. So, you want to be that guy who knows when Victor finishes this minutes restriction. So if any of you guys find out, please let me know. But let's assume that he's only going to play 24 minutes a game. I'd say that line is pretty much spot on. But he does have a great matchup. Looking at his rebound line, he's covered it in 4 of his last 10 games, so him to get 9.5 rebounds. This is a wonderful looking chart. So everything is trending upwards in terms of his rebounds. The game against Chicago is when his minutes restriction really started. We saw, well, actually, it was a game against Utah. Chicago, I think I'm not too sure. He got injured somewhere. But this, you can see his results started to go up. He's hit 4 of his last 10, averaging 9.1. Over his last 5, he's averaging 9. But I do like what I'm starting to see out of Victor. Looking at it doesn't have a head-to-head matchup. What am I talking about? It's his first game against the Hornets. Let's go into his assists. His assists, 6 out of 10 games he's covered, averaging 4.2 assists in that span. He got his first career triple-double against Detroit Pistons. He got 10 assists in that game. Prior to that, 4 consecutive games going under. So I did have a look at his PRA because he's got such a good opportunity. He's covered his PRA in 3 consecutive games. But then I was also thinking, this is a back-to-back game for the Spurs. They just versed the Cleveland Cavaliers. How much? Actually, that's a lie. That's not the Spurs. That's the Brooklyn Nets. So it's not a back-to-back game. Get these black and white teams mixed up. So I think Victor PRA definitely could be something that I play. Might make a decision on that before I go to sleep. So it's not a back-to-back. He still probably has his minutes restriction, but he does have an excellent matchup. The line is the highest it's ever been since he started this minutes restriction, but it's also the easiest matchup that he's faced in that span. So, yeah, I think Victor's probably going to be primed for a very big game here. We shall see. Before we jump into my best bets for this slate, I want to give a shout out to Fu Manchu Matthew for his comment of the day. Now, he's been supporting this channel for quite some time. He posts a comment on every single video. So firstly, I want to say thank you for that. Now, the comment that he left, it was a short one, but it's an important one that I want to call out. He said, good on you for posting the L's and getting into it. So on the picks that I post on YouTube, I'm on a bit of a losing streak at the moment, and I've got to take accountability for that. I replied to his comment and I said, shit picks get shit results. So yeah, the results have been pretty shit. There's times when you get unlucky. There are injuries or players missing shots that they normally would make, but sometimes it's just a bad pick. So if you do tail the bets that I make and share, and they do happen to lose, I do apologize for that. There may have been something that I overlooked. But I think it's obvious, given the level of detail that I go through or the data that I use, there's a lot of time and effort that goes into finding these picks and sharing them. But look, it is what it is, but you've got to be accountable for it. I don't necessarily like to blame players for it too much. At the end of the day, they're not making me put that bet on. So it's up to us as the sports bettors to do all the thorough research, rely on your gut feel, your knowledge of the sport, and rely on other experts in this industry to really help us make those winning plays. Talking about winning plays, I've got 2 best bets that I want to share with you. Starting with Zubac from the LA Clippers. I like his over 22.5 points and rebounds. Now, Zoo's covered this line in 14 of 37 games, averaging 22.2 points and rebounds per game. His last 10 games have been better. He's covered in 5 of his last 10, averaging 24.3 per game. But if I'm going to be honest with you, it's not the numbers that are standing out for me for this pick. It really is about the matchup. So putting the numbers aside for a second, I'm just talking about the Grizzlies. So the Grizzlies, I did say this earlier, they are now the third most rebounds to centers over their last 15 games. Zoo matched up with them at the end of December. He finished with 15 points and 20 rebounds in that matchup. In that same game, Bismack Biyombo recorded 13 points and 12 rebounds for the Grizzlies, which is great. But herein lies the problem for Memphis. They just waive him, leaving them very thin in their front court. So Biyombo's been waived, Steven Adams is injured, Santi Aldama is injured, Brandon Clark is injured. So they only have Jaren Jackson Jr. and Xavier Tillman left. So Jaren Jackson, he's 6'10", but he averages less than 6 rebounds per game. Xavier Tillman is 6'7", having to play center. So Zoo's going to have a great matchup to eat inside. Jaren Jackson Jr. will contest every drive to the rim. So I can see Zoo benefiting from drop-offs from Russ, PG, Harden. If he's got Tillman, he can work him in the post. Look, one of the stats on Zoo is that this season, he's shooting a career best 65.9%, which ranks him 4th among centers in the NBA. He's actually made some comments recently which complemented my thoughts on how this game is going to go. He said Westbrook and Harden, they're going to make the right play every single time. They're always looking for you. They play old school basketball. They're going to reward their big. And I love playing with guys like that. Ty Lue also made some comments recently. He explained why Zoo's performed so well since James Harden arrived and how he's been the biggest beneficiary. Tyronn Lue shared that Harden and Zubac, they've been working together. After every practice, they spend 15 minutes just working on the pick and roll constantly. So, look, Zoo's got a great matchup. It's against a depleted Grizzlies team. The blowout is the risk, especially at this point in the season when people are just getting blown out for fun. But I think this matchup is just too good for me to avoid. So let's go Zoo. I'm riding with you, my boy. My next pick is for Jabari Smith Jr. And I'm taking his over 1.5 3-pointers made. I'm also splashing a little bit of cash on him to get over 2.5 3-pointers made. And that's $3.50 or plus $2.50 for those of you in the US. Now, he's covered this line in 18 of 35 games this season. He's averaging 1.8 3-pointers made per game. Over his last 5 games, he's covered this in 3 of them, averaging 2.4 3-pointers made in that span. The 2 games that he went under were up against the Miami Heat, who allow the 5th least 3-pointers made to power forwards, and the Brooklyn Nets, who allow the 10th least 3-pointers made to power forwards. So he's got a much easier matchup against the Pistons, who allow a shit ton. So what I love about his recent form, though, this 5-game span, he's attempting 5.6 3-pointers per game, and he's shooting them at almost 42%, making 2.4. He's got an excellent matchup. The Pistons allow the 6th most 3-pointers made to power forwards. More recently, check this graph out, actually. Instead of more recently, check this out. Dating back to December 21st, 12 out of 15 power forwards the Pistons have played against have covered their line for 3-pointers made. In his last matchup against the Detroit Pistons, I think it was about a week ago, he attempted 5 3-pointers made, and he made 3 of them. Now, the Detroit Pistons also have Beef Stew back in the lineup, and he'll be playing at the 4, Duren at the 5. And given his physicality, his girth, his thickness, I think we see Jabari prefer to play on the outside too. So before Duren arrived, Stewart was the starting center for the Pistons. And I like to believe that old habits never die. And what I mean by that is a lot of these centers, if you're responsible for defending the rim, you eventually create a habit of needing to contest every shot at the rim. For example, Jaren Jackson Jr. does it. He does it all the time. No matter who drives the ball in, it's his responsibility to get there. And that's a habit you build up over time. In Rudy Gobert's first season with the Minnesota Timberwolves, we saw Karl Anthony Towns struggle with a transition. That had always been his job. When they were both on the court, they both kept doing it, and they kept leaving fours open because Cat couldn't help himself come to the rim. I think Beef Stew's got a similar complex. Beef Stew's not going to be able to help himself. He'll be there to contest it. And when he does, I can see Jabari Smith being left open in the corner for some threes, making him cash. So, look, the blowout is a risk in this game as well. But with a prop with his three-pointers, he tends to get those early in the game. He doesn't wait till the fourth to start popping off. If anything, he won't shoot them in the fourth if he's not shooting well. He'll only take these threes in the fourth if he's got it going early. So I think that mitigates the risk somewhat, but I do like Jabari Smith Jr. here. Take him for over 1.5 3-pointers made. And if you're feeling it a bit saucy the way that I am, take it for over 2.5. Let's go. All right, so all the picks are done, but the video is not. Here's a nice little recap on the day that was, which wasn't very nice at all. The first pick we had was Damian Lillard over 24.5 points. I needed him to shoot a better shot percentage, which he did. I knew he had a great matchup, which he did. He started off on fire, but unfortunately for us, the Bucks absolutely blew the brakes off the Celtics. Damian Lillard finished with 21 points on only 12 shot attempts, shooting 3 from 8 from downtown. Easily could have gone off for a 40-point game, to be honest, if the Celtics kept it competitive. So that was a tough loss. Took Kevin Durant over 37.5 points, rebounds, and assists. And what can I say? Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, they scored 30-plus points each. They both take about 20 shots in that game. Kevin Durant only attempted, 12 shots in that game? It was pretty woeful, to be honest. 18 points, I think he finished on. And at the same time, they blew the Lakers off the court. He didn't need to do more. So that one sucked. When I think about that one, what didn't I consider a blowout? Well, no, of course, I thought that was a very close game. The Suns haven't been shooting the lights out. Neither have the Lakers. They're both jostling for position in the West. Big-time players, all the stars are out. I would have thought it was going to be closer, but that I didn't predict whatsoever. Actually, even in the Bucks game, who would have thought that the Bucks were going to blow the Celtics out? Actually, I definitely considered that because I knew the Celtics played OT. I knew they were on a back-to-back. It's part of the reason why I thought Dame was going to go off, because they wouldn't have the legs to slow him down in the fourth quarter, but they didn't have the legs at the start of the game. So, look, that sucked. It takes our season total of 43.7 units. We're under 10% ROI, which I'm not happy about. But the YouTube record, even though it's taken a little bit of a hit, on the personal front, if you're in the Discord, hit a few value plays today, made some profit. But look, if you guys are interested in seeing what I do in the Discord, you can feel free to jump in completely free. But look, that's a wrap. That's everything that I've got for you. Picks are done, previews done, the recap is done. We spoke about Props.cash, one of my favorite tools for NBA picks. And if you made it this far and you haven't signed up for Props.cash, go ahead and check it out. 25% off in your first month. Use Daft 25. But look, no pressure. You don't want to, and you just want to hear me and the picks that I play, just sub to the channel and watch me every single day, and we'll get it busy then. But you guys have a wonderful night. Wherever you're watching this, have a wonderful day, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Holla!
Sub to the channel cause your boy's getting busy. Coming to your line from the west side of Sydney. We've got the free picks and the juice on the daily. It's all free, you don't even have to pay me.